show you, which would.
Yes, you are here.
Yeah. Which would, while we wait, let me get, I find, okay, so if I just quickly share to explain something to Phil, there we go. Right, can you see this picture here?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the most citing and most cited paper in the ACM Hypertext conference, which is a data set I've created, which is, I happen to have a clean set of data, so that's what I started with.
Yeah.
And this is me importing data into Noda, which I think this is about as much data as it can handle at the moment. You'll notice I actually drew an axis in there using just nodes and lines, because I couldn't even figure out what I was looking at when it came in. And in this diagram, I think I am slightly using a third dimension. Originally, I put it all with no Z component.
Yeah.
So here, yellow lines are citing something, blue lines are being cited by, orange dots are full papers, blue dots are short papers.
Okay.
I'm just playing around with that. Plus the fact that I find if I didn't start to do that, I couldn't really make head nor tail of things. And although the labels do billboard, by which I mean that when you look at them, they are at right angles to you, you can rapidly see that at a distance where you can sort of see the whole, you can't read anything at all, which is another hardware limitation at the moment. So you literally have to have something round in front of your face to be able to read it, which begs the question as to whether this is a useful environment for data exploration at this point, because you can put stuff in it, you can play with it, but you can't really do anything meaningful with it because it's too big to see.
Yeah, I think that's the trouble with a lot of network diagrams, isn't it? It's like they're zoomed out, they're too big, and then you've got to zoom right in to see the individual.
Yeah, I mean, plus the fact that, as I noticed someone commented in a visualization sort of forum, is saying that, any really good visualization you've seen has probably been hand retouched, which is I think a rather important point, because to have clarity to anyone, well, even sometimes even to yourself, an automatic layout very rarely will do something. I mean, here all you're seeing in that, sorry, the picture I just turned off, the picture I showed you is the x-axis was the year of the conference, the y-axis was just a sibling order in the paper, because I had to have something, no more than that. Because as one of the things I thought, well how do I arrange it? I don't know. I got to put it somewhere. So interesting. So I was just explaining to Phil, we were talking about, well, so what are we doing with visualization and stuff?
And virtual reality and how it fits in with this. Is it a help or a hindrance? I don't know.
I think it's just early days. My experiments so far say that the tools are massively immature at the moment for some of the things we want to do with them. And the hard part is to explore them without actually having a sort of rage quit and say none of it works. It's all got to be built.
Yeah.
Definitely. So I think the problem for something like Noda, for example, and I don't wish to speak ill of it. I mean, it's interesting what it does, is that what it's mainly doing is you're building something at hand's distance. Yeah. That's about the size of things, and you walk round it. It's not the sort of thing where you're actually really working on things. So I'm not actually even sure what they think people are doing with it. Certainly what you're not doing is trying to look at data like I was there. It's just not capable of that.
Yeah.
But it does come the question is, well, if you had something like a 3D D3GS or something inside a visual space, what you might do with it. And I think the problem here is that, unfortunately, until some of those frameworks have been built, it's hard to see. And we also have the chicken egg problem. The reason I've been playing with real data is that play data is next to useless for figuring anything out. That much I've learned along the way. So, I mean, the reason I built one of these data sets was simply so that I didn't have to waste time building data to look at a real data set. And I could see all the ugly, the fact it's lumpy, it doesn't, it's not nicely distributed. any timeline demonstration will show you sort of 10 photos arranged across 10 years. That's not the timeline. That's just not how temporal data occurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Phil.
Lots of work to be done. Hey,
How are you?
good, thank you. Yeah, thanks for reminding me about today as well. And have you fully recovered from your, what did you have? Was it COVID or something like that?
My wife and son had COVID.
Oh.
I had a cold.
A cold. Oh.
Which is really
Managed to
strange.
you transmuted the virus into, into a cold one.
I may very well have just had the cold, and it meant that the virus didn't stuck with me, but it's been a really annoying cold. Even now, I sleep a lot, and it's been over 2 weeks, so it's really hugely annoying. Hello, Brandel. Yeah. We're just taking a bit of time to see who's coming. I know there's quite a few people who can't be here today. Fabian will be half an hour late and muted because he has another meeting. And Adam Verne is not able to make it today, unfortunately. And the rest we don't know about. But why don't we, to give Phil a bit of an intro, Mark, did you introduce yourself already, or did you talk about the chart? You maybe want to do a 1 minute intro?
I mean, I was showing some stuff. I mean, I suppose my angle here is, I actually have a deep interest in text and hypertext and spatial mapping. So that's the angle, I guess, I'm in, that interests me about VR is how we might better explore relationships in that space. I'm not a programmer. I know enough to pretend to play one on screen, but I'm not able to do anything useful.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and we were talking about linking stuff, citation networks. So just before the others joined, Mark was showing me a demo.
I'm just going to upload a photo. I think it's probably up already.
Yeah, that's right. I can see it there. Thanks.
And Peter, you had your hand up.
Yes, I was thinking, would it be possible to have Noda put up a little sub view in a window off to the side that had a zoom in on the text of one of the items that you can't read if you have the cursor on top of it?
I think that's a discussion for the future when we have a proper Noda. But Mark, do you have an immediate reply to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly the sort of thing that people are going to have to think about. It's clearly not where the designer's head is at the moment, and which I totally understand, because at the moment they're actually building something very small scale, and I think the CSV I rapidly witness the fact that when I put the whole data set in, it can't cope. So that's 80 nodes and links, that diagram, and that's probably, I suspect, pushing what it really wants to do. So at the moment it's a tool for building what looks like a data diagram, but effectively it's a box and line diagram for drawing at arm's length is how I would characterize it at the moment. And I don't mean that in an unkind sense. I think that's just the state of the art. It just begs the question. One of the challenges is one thing is sort of drawing. The other is when you want to associate it with textual
Mark,
data.
I think we'll take the longer points when we have a full discussion on Noda, which I think we will need at some point soon. But yeah, so you've done a basic introduction. I see Ismail is joining us, which is fantastic. Ismail, do you want to do a 1 minute hello to Phil of who you are?
Well, hello everybody. I'm Ismail Gildin, friend of Frode Hegland from a long time ago, probably through the mediation of his lovely son Edgar, who brought us together in more ways than one, and with admiration for Frode's work on visual meta and other things. I was a librarian. I was a librarian of Alexandria. I founded the new Library of Alexandria, Egypt, back in 2001. Now retired, so I'm an emeritus librarian. And I'm very, very interested in pursuing with you the ideas that might sketch out where is the future of text in our rapidly changing societies, and what is the role of technology in it, and how we're going to interact with that technology.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Peter, randomly going through here.
Okay, I'm an attorney by formal training and a programmer with long-term interest in hypertext and university futures, foresight, whole range of different subdisciplines I delve into from time to time, such as both disciplinary lines with the.
Thanks, Peter. Your mic is not very clear today. Is there anything you can do to check so when we get to dialogue after Phil does a bit of a demo, you might be able to make it better, do you think?
Maybe I just need to speak up more. Is that any better?
Yes.
Thanks. Yes.
That's good. Brandel.
Nice to meet you, Peter. Thanks. Sorry.
Hi. My name is Brendel, and I am a interactive computer graphics. By trade, I'm an interactive computer graphics engineer. What that means in practice is that I look at not how to make things fancy, but how to make things interactive, how to be able to manipulate ideas and see the results in something tangible. And I have been, in large part, responsible for this group's pivot to its interest in virtual reality, because of the opportunities afforded by embodied sort of interaction with things. Also very strong adherent of embodied cognition and extended mind, this concept that we understand things by manipulating things, moving them around, and understanding the spaces that we reside within. So I've made a number of, I think, hopefully interesting sort of interventions and provocations, essentially, on things like virtual reality-based word processing and Wikipedia navigation, where you have an entire space that you're sort of manipulating a timeline through, being able to see the connections and build those things out. I believe something special happens when you exist in a space like that, and you can use your whole body, have modalities of interaction that differ more than just moving a mouse around a single sort of space with a keyboard and mouse. And yeah, so I'm really interested in the totality of what that text stuff is like, particularly once the screen falls away as a primary sort of mediating metaphor. I work in Silicon Valley, currently at Apple as a technologist, but this is very much the things that I do for fun. So I'm really excited to hear about your work as well.
Great, thanks. And while you were introducing yourself, Frodo held up your book as well, the extended.
Oh yes, that's unfortunately not my book, but I intend to write something related to it.
Sorry, I didn't say it. Right, great, thanks. Look forward.
Heavily presented by Brandel to the group, and I'm telling everybody to read it now, including my son's teachers,
right,
and headmasters. It's a vital piece of work. I'm going to, before I let you have fun, Phil, I'm going to show you something else, which is relevant to what we'll be talking about, which is our journal. Yes. This is our current issue. And for the rest of you came in a little bit later. You and Mark were online earlier looking at what Mark had put into NODA in VR, which is interesting. But here is an interesting presentation issue. And I'm just going to make you guys small because you're probably grayed out. So the book is of course PDF, just like The Future of Text, table of contents, la la la. And here is the transcript from Jamie Joyce, who was previous to you. And what we have done, we have a great human transcriber. This is not done technically, this is done properly. So we chunked it up a bit. So there's a bit of pre-presentation chit chat, then there's presentation. And this time, as an experiment, when she goes listy, I make bullet points. And I'm highlighting things in the text that I think is important. And this has been sent to the group, so I'm sure there will be edits and so on. But because what you do, Phil, and what you're going to be demonstrating is such a rich way of reaching into large bodies of documents, I thought I just wanted to show you and the group, because I haven't seen it either. This way of doing it. And even harder, the bit after the main presentation, there is questions, and I've tried to do a few highlights there because, to be honest, not everyone in the world will read every single word of every transcript of every presentation we've ever had in this group.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a primer to show you that there are issues and we're looking at them. And I would now very much like to introduce you to the group. So this is the beginning of the presentation where the transcript will happen from.
Okay. Great.
And Phil is someone I randomly have coffee and lunch with in town in London. We're both in the same island. And we've tried to work together many times and it hasn't worked, which is really annoying because he has amazing resources that I want to utilize in author and reader. Question is how to do that. But having spent so much time with him and seen again and again, this new bit here, this new bit here, it just became clear to me that he had to present to you guys in an organized fashion that we will transcribe, the power of Scholarcy. So Phil, if you completely don't worry about the VR aspect of this, if you just do your normal presentation, then I'm sure we will start talking about and expanded views for the kind of data interaction that you make possible. So over to Phil.
Great. Thank you very much, Frode. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Phil Gooch. I founded a company called Scholarcy about 3 years ago, but my interest in interactive text goes a bit further than that, mainly through the field of natural language processing, which is what I did my PhD in. And really, I was trying to solve this problem that I had when I was doing my PhD, was that discovering new materials to read wasn't a problem. Once I had I discovered lots of papers, lots of resources. I downloaded folders full of PDFs, as I'm sure you all have, sitting on your hard drives at home and in Google Drive and in the cloud elsewhere. So I had all these documents I knew I needed to read, and I wanted a way of trying to find, a way of speeding up that process. At the time, not necessarily connecting them together or visualizing them, but just really sort of pulling out the key information and just bringing that to the forefront. So, I set about building some software that could try and do this. And what emerged was something called Scholarcy Library, which I will show you now. So I'm just showing my screen. So Scholarcy Library is like a document management system. You upload your documents and they can be in any format. They can be PDFs. They can also be Word documents. They can be PowerPoint presentations. They can be web pages. They can be LaTeX documents. They can be pretty much any format. And what it does is, if we look at this as being the original PDF for one of the papers that I've got in my system. So this is a typical PDF. In this case, it's like the original author manuscript that's been made available ahead of time as the sort of open access version of this paper, if you like. And, and as you're obviously familiar with PDFs that aren't created in software such as Liquid Author that Frode has built, most PDFs don't give you any interactivity or anything at all. You can't click on these citations or go anywhere from them, for example. So the first thing I wanted to solve, well, if I bring this into Scholarcy, what does this look like? The same paper. Well, the first thing it does is try to pull out what is the main finding of the study, and it brings that to the forefront. The other thing that it tries to do is take the full text and then make citations clickable. So you saw in the original text, the original PDF, that citations aren't clickable. So my first goal was to make citations clickable. So I can go on to that citation and go straight to that paper and then read that or pull it into my system and link it together. So that was the first goal. And then the second goal was, well, once I've broken this PDF down, can I do things like extract the figures and so on, and just, again, make them first-class citizens so I can zoom in on them. And so that was the other goal. And this all really then turned into a process to turn documents into structured data. And so what I built was this back-end API, which is freely available to anybody. It's in the public domain. It's not open source code, but it's an open API, so anyone can use it. If you go to api.scholarcy.com, there's a number of endpoints here, which look a little bit esoteric. So there is some documentation on this in GitHub. If you go to scholarcy.github.io/slate, there's a whole bunch of documentation on what this API does. But essentially what it does is you give it a document, such as a PDF, but it doesn't have to be PDF, and you upload it, and it basically turns it into JSON. And as you know, once you've got JSON or you've got XML or any structured data, then you can pretty much do what you want with it. So what it's done is turn that, hopefully turn that JSON into something. Did I actually run it? Sorry. always the thing with a live demo, isn't it? It never quite goes according to plan. Right. So there's that PDF that I had, and here it is in JSON format. And with all the information broken down into key value pairs. So you've got a key for the references, and you've got all the references there. You've got a key for the funding group, and that's all broken down. So once you've got structured data, then it's quite easy to bring it into this nice kind of interactive format like this, where everything's kind of hyperlinked and clickable. So we know we can go straight to the study subjects and so on, and find out there were 16 people involved in the study. And then we can do other things like, well, what were the main contributions of the study? And we can just sort of scroll down, click on one of those, and it takes us straight to that finding. So the idea was really, I suppose, not really to cheat, but to basically speed read this paper by highlighting the key findings and making them clickable as we made the references clickable. So all this is in the JSON data that's underlying all this, and then it makes it more interactive, basically. So that's the goal. So that's all well and good. So you basically what we've done is turned PDF into interactive HTML with clickable citations and expandable and collapsible sections. But obviously, you want to deal with more than one paper at a time. And so what I looked at doing was building something that could turn this into linked data. Now, I didn't want to build a new piece of software like Noda or a triple store or anything like that. And so I found that the lingua franca for a lot of new tools that try to connect stuff together is this format called Markdown. So one of the tools that I use for hosting Markdown, and you may be familiar with it, is called Obsidian. But there's many tools like this. There's Roam Research, there's Bear, there's Logseek, there's a whole bunch of tools I'm sure you're aware of that handle Markdown data. So here is that same paper that was once a PDF, now in Scholarcy, but now we can export that to Markdown, and we can do this one at a time, or if I really want to, I can export all of them in one go. So I can, I've only got 4 here, but I could have 400. Export them all in one go as Markdown, and then I can load those into Obsidian. So I'll just export that one as an example. Put that in my Obsidian library. And when I open that in Obsidian, it looks like this. So it's the same data, but now it's in Markdown format, and so it's it's editable. So I can just move this annoying Zoom thing out of the way here. So if I want to then edit the Markdown in here, I can go away and start doing that and visualize it. But now we've got the same information along with all the other papers that I had in my collection that were also converted to Markdown using Scholarcy, so I can connect them together. So I've got like some of the key concepts. So if I click on one of those, then it shows me other papers in my collection, like this one that also talks about functional connectivity. So I can go straight to that paper, and then I can see, the main finding of that study, and I can see other things that it talks about, like medial prefrontal cortex, and I can see other papers that talk about that. So you can see we've got this network graph going on, but it's kind of embedded in the text. So I can read the paper as I had before, and I can view all the figures and zoom in on them, but they're in this Markdown format where you get all this linking for free, which is great. And in common with other tools that handle Markdown, you can do these visualizations. So it's going to show me here, if I could click on this graph view, how these papers are connected, in this case by citations that they have in common. But if I really want to see all the concepts that I have in common, then I can click the tags view, and then suddenly you've got all these green nodes here that talk, that show me where all these papers, how they're connected by their key concepts. And as Mark and I were discussing just before this session started, the issue then is that you've got too much information. So this becomes a question of what do we do with these kind of visualizations, and I'm sure many of you here will have suggestions and ideas about how to deal with this. Because once you've got more than 10 or 20 papers, these kind of visualizations become a bit intractable. But Obsidian lets you do that kind of graph analysis, and I think you can write queries and so on, which I haven't really done much with really. But really, my background is not at all in visualization; it's in NLP and converting documents from one format to another. So really that's been my motivation in building this, is being able to turn documents from PDF into Markdown or other formats. And so, that's kind of what Scholarcy does, really. It's a document conversion software. It's a summarization software. It gives you the key highlights of the paper, its objectives and methods and results. So it pulls all that automatically from each document using NLP and deep learning. And it makes it interactive. But, it does also extract it into these various different formats. And one other thing it tries to do is to show you how the paper relates to what's gone on before. So when an author has talked about how their work sits within the wider field of research, Scholarcy tries to pull out that information and highlight it. So it shows you, where's some potential differences with previous work and who's talked about that in terms of counterpointing with what this author's saying. And again, we can click on that and go straight to that paper if we want to. Or which studies does it build on? For example, does it build on a study by these guys? How was it different? So it's kind of pulling out all those citation contexts and then classifying them into, is it confirming? Is it contrasting? Is it just building on it? How does it relate? It doesn't always get it right, but most of the time it gets in the right ballpark, and it just kind of gives you that kind of extra context. And again, just making that information interactive. So I guess the next step is, well, what more could be done with this data? At the moment, it's in a very two-dimensional view, either in Scholarcy as a one paper at a time, or in Obsidian via a network graph view. But what else could be done with this data? And maybe some of you have some suggestions about how that could be visualized, perhaps using virtual reality or some other means. But really, the motivation of this was, to make it easier for me to read all the papers that I had to read for my PhD. Make it into a friendlier format that I could, for example, read on my mobile phone. So, this tool called Obsidian has an iOS app. And so, I can actually read this paper in a nice friendly format that will be responsive, including the tables, because Scholarcy also converts the tables in the PDFs to HTML as well. So, I can get all that data out as well and read that on the go, which was kind of the goal of doing this, really. So that's Scholarcy in a nutshell. It exports to various other formats as well. So if I really wanted to export my paper, imagine this was my own paper, I wanted to export it to PowerPoint, I will turn that into a presentation. So that was one thing I did do with a chapter of my PhD, is turn that into a presentation. So I could just export this as a PowerPoint slide deck, and it will summarize this paper and distill it down into a series of slides. He says, but it's sitting there thinking about it while I'm talking, so maybe it won't. But that is the goal, really, is sort of be able to convert and switch between different formats without having to sort of worry about, whether did it start off as a PDF, or was it, Word document, or is it, something else. Really, every document gets turned into this standardized format that we call our summary flashcard, where it's got that same structure. I was hoping to be able to show you the PowerPoint export, but that doesn't seem to be playing ball today. So that's basically in a nutshell. I mean, there's a sort of free demonstrator that you can try out, because we do have a number of free tools, including the reference extraction component that Frode was alluding to earlier, that links all the references together, and that's a freely available tool. And so is this. So if you want to try this out with any document, you just upload a paper, and it does exactly the same as what I showed you in the main document management tool, but it's just one document at a time. So you can upload a paper, and it breaks it down into this flashcard, and then you can download that in Markdown if you want, and then visualize that with all your other documents. So there's a whole sequence of other tools as well that we have, but this is the main one. It's what we call our flashcard generator. So yeah, that's it really in a nutshell. Let's maybe bring it into a discussion and get some feedback, really, because it'd be good to know about how we could take the structured data and do something else with it other than put it into Obsidian or Rome or other Markdown aware tools. Maybe there's some more interesting things that could be done there. So I will pause at this point.
It really is a nutshell, and it's just amazing what you have done. And you presented like you've done a few Lego blocks, and that's about it. It's just British understatement. But there's one thing before we go into proper dialogue I'd really like to see more of, And that is the bit where you come across a citation in a document and you can click on it to find out its, to put it crudely, its value or relevance. Would you mind showing that? Because
Oh, yeah. Sure.
when you do these big graphs, where to go next is always a huge question. And I think this navigationally really, really helps.
Sure. So let's look at that same paper that I was looking at earlier. So if we've got a citation, so we can mouse over it and you know, we can click and go to that paper. But in terms of what is the value of this citation, so we've kind of partnered with another startup called Cite.ai that you may be familiar with. And what we can do is show the statistics that Cite have gathered on every citation. And I think they've got a huge database now of about 1 billion citations. And what this shows me is how many other people have not only just cited this study, but how many people have agreed with it. So it's had about 1,258 citations, but of those, 18 have been confirming the results of this study. So what that means is if I click on that link there, it's going to give me some more background. So here's the paper by Stam that I had, you know, that this author cited here, and we can see that it's got 18 supporting citations and 3 contrasting. Let's see what that means. It basically means that they're saying things like this: our results agree with previous studies, which include Stam and so on, consistent with this guy, for example. So basically these 18 of these citations are ones where they're all saying, yeah, we found something similar. But 3 of these, they found something different. So what do they say? Well, we can just click on that. So previous studies, blah, blah, Stam. It looks a bit ambiguous to me. I'm not sure if it's definitely contrasting or not. This is the thing with machine learning, you know, sometimes you don't get it quite right. And it's like, well, it's a bit borderline. Is this actually contrasting? But you can see again, the context in which the other people have cited this study that these guys have also cited, but, you know, were they positive about it or were they sort of negative? And so Cite.ai is a really cool tool for showing you this context about how everyone else has talked about this paper. So, for example, this paper here, we could find out who else has spoken about it. And let me just upload that. For some reason, we don't have a direct link to it in the main tool itself. So let's just let me just upload that, because these relationships go in 2 directions. We want to know what this paper is saying about other people's studies and what other people have said about those same studies, but also what do other people say about this study itself that I'm reading. So if I click on this link here, it should take me to what other people say about this Van Lutteveld paper, and we can see that actually people are a bit neutral about it. There's 31 citations and they just mention it, but none of them are contrasting and none of them are supporting. So it's like, well, yeah, they've cited it, but they haven't really said anything positive or negative about it. And so Cite.ai is a really cool tool that just lets you explore those citations. And, you know, we link to it as a matter of course. So every citation in here should have a button where you can see those stats. And then the other thing we try and do, and this doesn't always work, is then say, well, rather than going and looking and reading all these cited papers, can we just get the gist of them? So we have a little button here that will go away and find that each of those papers, and it will just do a quick sort of summary of like what was done in that paper, and then we can see it's like a subset of the abstract effectively. What was this paper about? Is this something that I'm actually interested in going away and reading more about? And if I am, then I can click on it and go and read it. So the idea is, you know, to bring all that information from each of those studies into one place, either with citation statistics from Cite. Again, this looks like a reliable study. 13 people have supported it, so that looks good. But what did it say? And again, we can just click the findings button here and it will go away and tries to pull out what the study found. And there's some of the findings there. So that's another aspect of what Scholarcy does, is that citation linking and classification.
Question to everyone in the group before I do the hands up thing. How amazing is this? It is absolutely amazing, isn't it? And also the way that Phil works with other APIs from other services, the way these things can link together is just so incredibly amazing. And I don't think most academics are aware of it. Because you're the newest in this session, Ismail, please you go, and then Peter.
Thank you. You probably are very familiar with the work of David King and a few others at Oklahoma State. I was quite interested in their work a few years ago because they had done hermeneutics of Islamic and Quranic work on 12,000 things. Phil, you had this diagram with all the nodes connected with the greens. And you said, well, where do you go from here?
Yeah.
It all looks pretty much like one big tapestry.
Yeah.
What struck me about what David King was doing at that time was that they were able, and this was really stunning for me, able to put all the authors. And then surprisingly, the graph tended to group authors together. So all of a sudden, the group of these Mu'tazilite debaters back in the 10th century were all in one part of the graph, and all the Ash'aris were another part of the graph, and the schools of thought somehow emerged out of that. So it didn't look exactly flat like the diagram. Based on a diagram of this kind of thing, they were able to group them into, so maybe the citations, maybe other things would be able to assist in that. But if it did that, then you might see schools of thought emerging in patterns in front of you.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think there's a huge amount there like that could be done. So that network that I showed was in another tool, which I'm not involved in. It's called Obsidian. I've just put a link to it in the chat. So it's obsidian.md. And that is just the tool that allows you to visualize these relationships. But, it's quite basic, and it doesn't show, I don't think it can show those kind of level of annotations that you mentioned that David King showed, where he had the authors and so on. But there are other tools that do a bit more than this along the lines of what you're suggesting. And one's called Connected Papers, which I'll put in the chat, where they do try to find out similar schools of thought. The idea is you put in one seed paper and it will find other related papers, not ones that are related by citations, but also similar themes. I'll just put that in the chat here. But I will also quickly share my screen to show you. And I think that what they're trying to do at Connected Papers is trying to generalize what you were suggesting, that, what you're talking about with David King, where they show, well, here's some, they've got the authors here for a given paper, and what they've tried to do is show related papers where maybe other people have cited them together in a group, or they've got similar themes, and so you can click on each of those and find out more about them, and you've got the abstract and so on. And there's another one, there's quite a few tools like this. There's one called Research Rabbit, which is pretty cool, but unlike Connected Papers, it only works if you've got an academic email address, which I don't have anymore. But those of you that have, you might want to check out Research Rabbit, because let me just stop sharing. That tries to do that. So I think there's, in answer to your question, Ishmael, there are other people doing those kind of visualizations and trying to generalize it. It's not something that I'm going to do myself. My role really is just to build tools that do convert from one format to another, so that other people can can do those visualizations. But yeah, I think it's a great suggestion, and I think it hasn't really, the potential hasn't really been fulfilled of all this visualization and linking yet. Partly because when the data sets become large, it does get hard to then keep track of what all these nodes and edges and what they mean. So maybe, I think, Mark, you've done some work on this with citations, about showing things about who's citing it and who cited it by, and looking at alternative ways of doing it other than a network graph. But I think there's still room to come up with some new type of visualization that would show all those relationships in a compact way. But you guys know more about the people that are doing that than me. Say I'm an NLP person. I'm not a visualization person. So I'd love to hear more about that kind of work.
Thank you, Phil. Peter?
Yes, I was wondering, have you received any pushback from any of the scholarly publishing houses complaining about your parsing of documents?
No, because that's a good question. We haven't had any complaints because we're not making those converted papers publicly available. So it's a tool, you know, it's like Dropbox or Google Drive. You drop your papers in, you're the only person who has access to those condensed versions of those papers, those interactive versions of papers. We're not putting them out there in a massive database that everybody could access. So, you know, no one's complained about breach of copyright because it's really only for personal use. But you know, I think there could be a lot of value in taking, you know, every open access paper and putting it into this kind of structured format and showing how they're connected. And I think if we were to do that, then yes, publishers would complain. But we are in discussions with some publishers about maybe doing it on a subset of their papers in some way. But it's just a question of priorities. You know, there's only me and one other person working on this at the moment. So it's kind of like, where do we spend our time? And publishers are a bit of a distraction at the moment for us. So we haven't really had, you know, we've had one or two conversations, but yeah, they haven't complained, basically, in short, is a short answer.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
Also, have you taken a look at the bibliometric literature?
The bibliometric literature, I'm familiar with some of it, but not massively, no. I know there's lots of stuff about the whole open citations thing, about making every citation open. There's the Open Citations Initiative. But did you have something in mind particularly?
Just that there's like a whole subset of the information retrieval literature looking at co-citation relationships and term clusterings amongst co-cited documents. And also there's like a whole sub-community that's been poking at those statistics for quite some time, and you might be able to find some useful connections there.
Yeah, so I've talked to a couple of people. There's a chap called Bjorn Brems, and there's also Bianca Kramer and David Schotten, who's in the Open Citations Initiative. So I've had a conversation with some of them. We've actually created an API that some of them are actually using within Open Citations. I'll just put it in here to extract references from papers so that they can be connected together. Because one issue with citations, although, you know, it's not so much of an issue now as it was that these citation networks were not freely available. Publishers weren't making them available unless you know signed up to Web of Science or Scopus. But now more publishers are putting their citations into Crossref so that people can do those kind of network analyses that you mentioned. But we've also created this tool that, you know, say that other people can use. So, you know, authors can put their own papers in there or preprints, and it will extract the references, and then they can be used. So some of the people at Open Citations have used this API to do some of that extraction. We've made it freely available for anyone to use as much as they want until the server falls over. So it's not on a very powerful server, but yeah, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work going on in this, but it's not something that I'm personally involved in. You know, I say I focus more on the data conversion side, and then once that data is converted, then I like to give it to other people to actually do the analysis if that's what they want to do with it.
Also, have you considered applying your tool to bodies of source code, like go to GitHub and look at all of the citation relationships that actually take the form of code inclusion?
No, it's a great idea though. No, I haven't done that. So yeah, that could be a good project.
This is a really cool tool. I'm really excited by the idea of rehydrating things that are essentially inherently already hypertext and just making them navigable in the way that they should be based on that conceptual content. In terms of suggestions or questions about further sort of directions, the main question that I would have is what sort of drives my work. So it hopefully doesn't come across as offensive. What is the point of the functionality? What are the intentions that people have that they follow as a result of using the system. And in particular, when somebody is good at using the tool, what are the primitives that they establish sort of mentally and procedurally that drive their behavior and action within it? And then beyond that, then what are the ways in which you can render those primitives concretely in order to make sure that they are that the use of the tool intrinsically lends itself to understanding things in the way that an expert does. So right now you have a lot of things in it that are useful, but they're not especially opinionated about what you do with them.
Sure.
And so the suggestion I would have in the question is how do you ramp up that opinionation? What are the ways in which you can sort of more strongly imply the things that you do with the things, and the way to read the specific things? So there are numbers like the confirmations and the adverse, the contrasting results and things like that. What do those mean, and how can people understand those more directly if they need to? One of the things, so I'm as these folks have heard me bang on about, I'm not from academia, so I'm not familiar with the sort of people's relationship with academic papers and what people spend their time doing. Something that I have spent time in within the context of academia is debugging my friend's prose.
Okay.
So where he's a PI in neuroscience, and I'm sure it's not peculiar to his discipline, but you can end up with some incredibly tangled prose where it's essentially trying to do too many things in a single sentence because there's a lot to get through. And what the sort of approach that I take is very similar to, have you ever heard of visual syntactic text formatting?
No, I haven't. I'll check that out.
It's a system of breaking sentences and indenting on prepositions and conjunctions.
Okay.
Oh, you built it into Liquid, right? Yeah, you did too. It's basically sort of taking something more like code formatting and turning something that I think is pretty generally the case in academic text, that it can end up pretty hard to read, and so that it allows you to follow individual ideas and understand the regards in which they're nested and indented through that. And yeah, so I guess what is the hardest stuff to do with these academic texts? And then also potentially, so I'm sure you've read and reread, as we may think, Van Lever's Bush's paper, column, article in 1945. Have you read it before?
I haven't, no.
I strung you. So it in large part, I'm not sure. I imagine Ismail will agree. You look like you're shaking his head, but it in large part kicked off the idea of computing for everybody who does computing.
Right.
And it was made by the man who was responsible for the National Science Foundation during the American war effort. And he was then complaining about the impractically large body of knowledge that was being produced year upon year, and needing some kind of a memory extension that would allow him to navigate all of the then, I think, academic papers, be able to create hyperlinks between them, and be able, and have some kind of desktop environment for doing it. It's a really wonderful read because he's basically describing the modern desktop computer, except built out of gears and microfiche, because that's what his mind was thinking of in the 1940s. The reason why I bring it up and belabor the point, though, is because one of the things that was really wonderful about Bush's conception of it is that the navigation of the information was just as important as the information itself. One of the things that I would be really curious with is, in terms of somebody's use of Scholarcy to navigate the docuverse, what are the artifacts that might be kind of re-rendered themselves about somebody's consumption and processing of of a series of documents, because it strikes me that that the sort of the browsing, interacting behavior that somebody engages in within the context of your system and framework that you have set up could itself be a valuable artifact, if only to the individual being doing that navigation, but potentially to other people. Bush envisioned people being trailblazers, constructing specific trails for other people to navigate, where the artifact was solely the conceptual linkages and navigation through those specific documents, which I think is something that is that Google essentially is able to leverage in terms of making page rank, but most other people don't have access to. But that your individual and the traversal of people actually between pages is one of the major sort of indicators of what are going to be good Google search results. They have the benefit to be able to make use of that data where other people don't. But in your case, because you are particularly interested in the individual, the user, making the connections and drawing it between, that actual sort of browsing history and navigation through specific things strikes me as itself a very useful artifact to see what people have missed, what people have spent their time on, and things like that. But yeah, really, really exciting work.
Great. Well, no, that's some really great questions there. So, to answer them briefly, I mean, the first motivation and use case for this was my own need to understand the literature in what my PhD, which was in health informatics. So the actual idea of linking all this stuff together at the time wasn't there. It was actually, can I break this single paper down into something I can read on my iPad without having to scroll through the PDF in tiny print? Can I turn this PDF into interactive HTML? So it was really much focused on what can I do with individual papers to make them easier to read and digest. And what we started hearing back from users was that actually, this particularly novice users. So most of our novice academics, I should say. So most of our users are people like in doing master's degrees or maybe in the first year of their PhD, where they may not be used to reading academic literature, and it takes them a couple of hours or longer to go through a paper and figure out what's going on. People tell us that it helps them reduce the time by as much as 70%. In terms of understanding the key ideas of the paper and just being able to follow up on the citations and the sources and so on. So that was the prime motivation, was really just to make the reading experience easier. And in fact, as recently, just at the beginning of this year, we've been awarded the status of assistive technology by the UK Department of Education, because we've got a large user base of people who have dyslexia or attention deficit type disorders, where they have specific needs. They're in university, they find it hard to deal with an overwhelming amount of information in one go, and they really find it beneficial to have it broken down. And there's a lot of research on this in terms of generally why students don't read the literature that they're given by their lecturers or by their educators. That they enroll on a course, they're given a long reading list, and then they have a lecture and they go to the next lecture, and the lecturer says, okay, who's read the material? And most people haven't. And educators have been tearing their hair out for years trying to figure out how do we encourage people to read. And there's some research on this about what will encourage students to read, and basically it's break the information down, make it more visual, make it more interactive, highlight some of the key points for them, just kind of give them a bit of hand holding, if you like. And so that's what the technology here tries to do, is provide that hand holding process. But in terms of the linking of everything together, that's kind of like a bit of a late addition really to Scholarcy. And it was really motivated by the fact that I noticed there was a big academic community on the Discord channel for this tool called Obsidian, where people were saying, well, how can I, incorporate all these tools into my research workflow? And the big need that most researchers or most students, anything from master's level onwards, the big task they have to do is they have to write a literature review that justifies the existence of their research. What have other people said about this topic? And then when you write your thesis or you write your essay, you've got to say, well, all these people said this, and this is my contribution. So the task of doing a literature review is an ongoing one that every academic has to do. And so we wanted to make that process easier. So once you've got those papers that you're going to write about, drop them into something like Scholarcy, and it will break them down and you can export them into a tabular format. So one of the things I didn't show is the export of everything to this, what we call a literature review matrix in Excel, where basically, you have about 100 papers, say, in your review, and you want to compare them side by side. And so that was one of the other motivations for building it, was to do that kind of side-by-side comparison of papers, which I can quickly show you actually while I'm talking. I'm just running that now. It's not very pretty when you first look at it. I'm just going to show you this live, though, if I may. Only take a minute or two, if that's okay. So, yeah. Writing a literature, some people in academia, there's whole departments that are just writing literature reviews. So things like, I don't know why it's gone up so big there. Right, so if I've got all my papers here, and there's 26 of them in this case, what do they look like side by side? So in Excel, here's the sort of raw format there. I'm just going to make that a table in Excel. And then what I can do is just make this a bit bigger, and then what I can do is slice and dice the information. Excel has this really cool functionality called slicers. So I can say, right, I want the authors as a slicer, I want the keywords as a slicer, and maybe the study participants. And so what we've got now is able to slice and dice these papers according to their keywords. So most academics are quite sort of familiar with tools like Excel. So we say, well, let's just look at all the papers that had 112 individuals or 125 participants, for example, and we can just show those, or look at all the ones that are about cerebral palsy or DNA methylation. So we can sort of do that quick filtering of papers and compare them side by side. And obviously I can make this look a bit prettier, but the key idea is being able to sort of filter papers by different topics or by numbers of participants, for example. We typically want studies that have a lot of participants, and ones that only got like eight subjects, for example, maybe aren't going to be as useful to us. So that was the other motivating factor, and this is how people use it, is to help with their literature review. So the whole thing about linking everything together, as I showed you in Obsidian, is a sort of a relatively new development, if you like. And so, yeah, it's open to hearing about how people might use this. At the moment, I don't think many people are using it for this kind of linking. They're mostly using it for reading, and they're mostly using it for creating these matrices that they then use to sort of help sort of figure out the literature and what's going on. For example, we might say, well, I'm only interested in papers that have open data availability. So I can just just look at ones that only have that are non-empty, for example. So if I select all the ones that are not blank, then it's filtered those papers. Only ones that have got some open data available are the ones I'm going to look at. Or I might want to say I'm only interested in papers that talk about their limitations. It's quite important that studies talk about the limitations, but not every paper does. So again, I can filter by the presence or absence of limitations. So this kind of literature review sort of thing is one of the ways that people are using Scholarcy, but primarily as a reading tool, or as a document ingestion tool. So for example, the other way I can get information in is if I'm reading a paper on nature, for example, I want to get it straight in while I'm reading it. I can just run this little widget that we built for the browser, which basically will go away and read and summarize that paper for us. And then we can click save, and then it will save it to our library. So I've got that that nature paper here again with its main findings and highlights and everything. So, and I can do that with a news article as well. If I'm reading a page in the Guardian, I can click on my extension button and again get some of the highlights and key points and links to, who's Sophie Ridge. I can click on that. She's a BBC journalist and newsreader, for example. So it does all that kind of key term extraction as well. And again, I can save that. So if I'm interested in news articles, then I can also use that. And then the other thing that people use it for is to subscribe to feeds. So you're probably all familiar with RSS feeds, which seems to be making a comeback, which is great. So, if I want to, I can subscribe to Guardian UK politics feed and just put RSS in front of that. And then if I go back to my library and say, let's create Guardian Politics and put in that feed. It's going to go away and pull in those articles and turn them into that interactive flashcard format for me. And I can do that with journal articles. So I'm actually subscribed to a feed on neurology from a preprint server called MedArchive, and it's pulling in each day. It's going to pull in the latest papers. So it's like an RSS reader as well. So people are using it for that. So yeah, they're mainly using it as a sort of reading, an enhanced reading tool, and as a tool to help with literature reviews. But the whole hypertext linking and things like that is a relatively new thing that, you know, we're not quite sure how many people are actually using it to create those kind of relationships between things. So while I was talking, actually, I'll just share my screen quickly and then I'll answer the other question. While I was talking, it's gone away and just started to pull in those Guardian articles here. So I put in Guardian Politics and already it started to pull in those articles here. So, you know, it doesn't just work with PDFs, you know, it works with news articles as well. And so, you know, tell us more about Grant Shapps. He's like the Secretary of State for Transport. So people use it if they're new to a subject. So if I'm new to neurology, I want to know what some of these terms mean. We've got these hyperlinks to Wikipedia. So, you know, if the Akaki information criterion is unfamiliar to me, I click on that and it tells me what it means. I've got the Wikipedia page about it. If I don't know what basal ganglion is, I click on it and it tells me all about it in Wikipedia. So that level of linking is something that we've had right from the beginning, and this is well used by people who use Scholarcy. But this kind of graph view is not really well used at the moment, and we're trying to sort of figure out how to make this friendlier, because we have to do this in a separate application at the moment. But the Wikipedia linking is very popular. So at the basic level of doing those kind of key concepts and their definitions, then that is certainly something that people use to get up to speed on a subject if they're quite new to it.
That's awesome. So just in terms of the use of things like site linking to people and concrete entities like a basal ganglion, I would love to see in sort of the direct adornment and representation of those entities within the document that you have as being reinforcing of the category of things that they are. So having a consistent representation, for example, of people, so that you have, if available, a thumbnail, but otherwise some indicator that these things are definitely people. Gotcha. rather than concepts. Yeah. So that you have a little bit of being able to kind of preemptively pull a little bit more information about what you'll find behind those things. One of the things that I really love to do is make sure that people minimize the surprises behind clicks, so that they have the ability to anticipate what kind of content they're in for, and that sort of helps frame their experience, because hypertext is very valuable insofar as it allows you to navigate those things. But if it's anybody's guess what's behind them, then that can be very distracting, because it means that it's difficult for them to sort of process things in those flows.
Yeah, that's
I'm
a great
also really
idea.
Curious. I'm great. Another thing that I'm really excited by just looking at that is, have you natural language processing lends itself incredibly well to question answer and sort of agentive mediated sort of interactions with stuff. Have you played with the speech to text and the text to speech kind of engines within browsers in order to be able to create conversational sort of agents and participants? And it strikes me as a lot of fun to be able to do, where you could actually ask free-form questions of a certain kind about your corpus in order to be able to kind of do things like that. Because that
would be a great
enhancement.
Yeah, I know there's some other tools. There's a tool that does some similar stuff to what we do. It's called Genie, and they have a question answering thing. We put that in the chat. So we haven't done that kind of thing, but yeah, certainly something we could add is either, you know, you may type in a question like, you know, I don't know, what is the best evidence that supports the use of this particular drug against COVID-19, for example, and then it would go and search all those documents and show you which ones generally support the use of that drug, for example. So we could do that, and that could also be a speech type interface. So yeah, that's something that we could add to it, certainly as a future enhancement. Yeah, that's a great idea.
the other benefit of a speech, like a speech primary sort of environment, is that you have the opportunity to use the visual sort of feedback as a secondary channel, where you can say, I've found these documents and they are here, and, and the documents up here and things like that. But yeah, no, super cool. One of the things, again, sorry, that it strikes me that you're sort of doing with it as well is the academic paper format is very terse and very dense, in no small part because it's for shipping important information on dead trees. And so, you know, as a general concept, being able to kind of be a little bit more generous with the space in order to be able to kind of characterize and categorize the different things that are in a paper is a really good sort of viewpoint and perspective on what it is that you're sort of able to do. Because, like I said, even though, you know, an iPad is a smaller, in many regards, device than the papers that you're going to be reading, or especially a phone, you do have the ability to renegotiate the sort of the space, the real estate that's devoted to those things. Yeah, being like even more generous with the space that you use to carve out, like, this thing is this, that thing is that, might be a valuable way of playing with all of the different sort of elements that you're kind of presenting.
Yeah, that's right. That was one of the main motivations, is to reduce that problem of squinting at PDFs on screen, because they were meant for print, but everyone's using them, you know, as an online distribution format as well, which wasn't what their intended purpose was. And so it was just to try to transform that content into something that was a bit easier to read on screen. I don't think we always succeed, but and I think actually within the academic community, there is this, people are trying to move away from PDFs as a means of distributing knowledge, but people are still struggling to get away from that format for various reasons, which, you know, is a subject for another discussion perhaps, but yes.
For a long time, but since you talked about the provocative 3-letter word PDF, it is something we're discussing here. We use it archival and we accept academics use it, but as an intermediary and rich format, clearly it's not up to snuff. Mark.
Well, first of all, thanks very much. I'm fascinated to see Scholarcy again. I'd something I've been meaning to find some time to dive into again, because it's interesting you talking about the obsidian graph and things. So, for instance, you know, one of the problems there is what it actually does is it shows you the links that you made. When I say you made, now this gets to the interesting part. If we're beginning to do automatic extraction, who made what link and for what purpose? Yeah. And this is where we get lost. And there's a massive, I mean, obsidian is very, there's obsidian in Rome, and there's a whole sort of cult around Zettelkasten. That's right. But a lot of these things, unintentionally, is the underpants business names, underpants names business theory, where if you collect enough stuff, a magical thing will happen and success at the end, and no one quite knows what the magic is. So I think one of the interesting challenges, but opportunities actually with sort of the data set you're now sitting across is to be able to sort of start to surface some of the relationships. The real sort of privilege you have with a data set like that is that you sort of know what's there, and you can begin to make more objective study comments as to what the links mean than many people can. So, you know, there's some interesting, in a sense, research to be done there. So one way one could look at, try and make sense about diagramming would be to take an area that we know has been just really well trampled by people. So you might say, well, there are a few surprises in the literature. And then play around with the visualization, because you ought to be able to then have something that's otherwise really hard to do, saying, okay, I've made this wonderful looking thing. Is it meaningful or not? And most of the time when we do this, we just don't know. Yeah. The main thing is we know it looks pretty. And that's another problem, because we like to make pretty and aesthetically pleasing graphs. Whereas life would tend to suggest that the messier it is, the probably the closer you are to the ground truth. Yeah. So I think that might be an interesting area to look at. So I think then to make sense of what the either inferred or extracted hypertextual nature of the or linkage in the data is, it's probably most meaningful to take, or most useful to take, a bit that's essentially well known for whatever reason, but one where there isn't a great thing. So, you know, don't pick something that's a great topic of sort of angst or social warfare at the moment, but just, I think that there ought to be places where we can see this, which brings me on to another thought, which is the degree to which I'm guessing that the sciences, the paper in the sciences, are more tractable to this process than the arts, because the language is by and large more direct. So we talk about a thing, and that's a thing that we can go and look up. Whereas in a more pure humanities side, the reference is just being maybe elliptical. Indeed, you have to know the subject matter quite well to know that they're actually referring at sort of one form removed from the subject that's actually under discussion. I think that's just a state of where we are with the art rather than a limitation per se. But is it the case you get more back from sort of science areas?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it does. For the reasons that you mentioned, they tend to be quite. The structure of them is quite standardized. You know, they have this what they call the IMRAD format: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. They're very much about stuff that can be packaged neatly into facts, if you like, or factoids, or things that have, you know, got some evidence about it. And when we have tried using it on some certain subjects in the social sciences, so you know, things like philosophy and biography, and well, I mean, literature generally, you know, as you go towards you know, the literature and particularly fiction, it doesn't really work at all, other than the fact that we can pull out, you know, named entities from people and places and so on. But in terms of pulling out the sort of argumentation structures is much harder in the humanities. But interestingly, though, actually, with some of the feedback we've got from some of the users is that in sort of more kind of social sciences subject, it does really well, and less well, in things like, you know, philosophical and rhetorical type articles, but in the hard sciences, if you like, or the, you know, the STEM sciences, it doesn't do very well in engineering, and I think the reason for that is a lot of mathematics, and we don't really handle mathematics very well. Getting decent mathematics out of PDF is hard, and then, you know, often it's all about, an engineering or mathematics paper is all about the equations, and the discussion around it is maybe not peripheral, but, you know, it's kind of secondary to the main sort of maths and formula that you're presenting and putting forward. So yeah, it does. There are some subjects that are harder to apply this kind of NLP to, and yeah, certainly the humanities is one of them.
Anyway, I hope in mentioning it, I mean, because I don't share that as a negative at all. I was just interested to see, you know, how all the coverage goes. Because another thing that occurred to me in terms of, again, because you've got this fabulous rich data set, is one of the things I always found myself worried about when I was sort of doing the research was avoiding the sort of Stalinist theory of art, that because 81 people said this was really good, it must be good. And indeed, one of the things in our sort of our PhD group at Southampton I remember was discussing was actually a way that you could start, for instance, to classify what's a drive-by citation. You know, oh, well, I have to cite that because otherwise I get shouted at. In other words, to my mind, a meaningless citation, because it's been done for no real good intent, as opposed to the thing that you actually genuinely wanted to cite because it actually added interest. And that strikes me as a challenge when doing this extraction. Not because of the sin of commission, but that you get to the next level. So in a sense, do we need to start learning new ways to read this? So as a sort of student or a user of this rich data set, what are the new sort of questions I need to learn to ask? Because to a certain extent, we arrive at this technology at the moment. So, oh, look, this number is bigger than that number. And we don't often stop ourselves from thinking, yes, but is that, is that deep enough thing? So it's there's some interesting sort of angles I think to be played there as well. How one might tease apart some of the raw numbers which otherwise float up the surface. Because this is what I was thinking when you bibliographies and these raw citation counts. Because I just, maybe it's just a field I was working, but I don't think so. That I was often surprised at how many times I went to a really highly cited paper. I'm thinking, I just don't see it. I don't see what is so special about this. And even when I put it in the context of what was known at the time, it's still not special. It's clearly being cited because it's getting cited a lot. But no one has ever thought to say, this actually isn't a very interesting or useful paper. And I just want at a slight tangent, because you're digging up here things. I'm interested to sort of know, what do you see a sort of edge as to how far back you can sort of easily go with things? Because presumably with PDFs, you don't go back very far before the sort of OCR and stuff was not that hot. Or are you re-OCRing stuff, or?
No, so we don't have an OCR engine at the moment, so the PDFs do need to have extractable text. So so we did do a project a few years ago with the British Medical Journal where we were just pulling out the end of article references from a collection of PDFs which were only scanned images. And they did the OCR themselves. They sent them off to a company to do the OCR. We got the OCR versions of the PDFs back, and then we did all this extraction for them. And the data was really noisy. But we were, at that time, we were just interested in getting the bibliographies from each article. So the trouble is with doing OCR on demand for, we often get people uploading 200-300 page PDFs, and the idea of doing that on demand has just fills me with fear having that run at scale. So we don't do that, and we just
Sure. Yeah.
So, but yeah, it could be done. It could be done, but that would be a separate standalone project. I think that would be like a research project to go and try to text mine that archive, if you like, of old PDFs and do something interesting with it.
Because it's sort of, the reason it sticks in mind is so there's a sort of almost implied sort of temporal cliff somewhere, some distance back from us, where things start to come into sort of easy digital focus, which is unavoidable, but it's perhaps something we need to start to recognize. So there was one thought, but it's passed from mine, so I'll let Fred speak.
So Phil, the reason you are here, as we've kind of discussed before, is you allow for analysis for interactivity. And I'm wondering, before I'm going to ask the question first, not to you actually, for Brandel and Fabian.
Okay.
I'm going to waffle on for a minute now, but if you guys have something you want to show Phil that you have worked on, or something else in VR to help him see where this fits. I just want to highlight for my own personal work with my own personal software, when I look out and I see so many people doing amazing stuff, the only thing that I'm trying to contribute to it is simplification, because you can kind of make things really, really horrendously complex, obviously. So I'm wondering if by making the interactions with this more tangible, we can have more. Yes, here we go. I can stop waffling now. Fabian would like to show something.
Great.
Hey everyone. So this is not actually analysis, network analysis or graph analysis or any scientometrics. Simply putting the PDFs in space of an upcoming conference. It was for a VR conference. And then I think a lot of people got that struggle. Is like a lot of people look interesting, but then you have to start with one. I know at least I can't read 2 or 10 papers at once, so I need to find which one. And basically what I do is I put them in space. I set up, let's say, the space to make it friendly, one team with the conference, and then I'm going to put them. I have a little annotation system with 3D object where I put post-it note if I need to write something on it, if I'm not sure if it's interesting, if it's really mind-blowing and I want to read it first. And yeah, that's the kind of result. It's a social pace, so I can invite somebody to go through, and then we can discuss about which one to do to read first. And then the bottom right, I don't know if you can see clearly, there is a gray platform, and then I can send it to my e-ink reader and writer so that I can sketch on top, annotate it and all that. So I have a couple of other examples where it's more the graph view, and then you can go through, but it's a bit more abstract. So I think this was the more tangible way, and I would definitely like to have. I was showing my personal annotation through this, for example, but I could very easily soon, next to a paper, an article, information related to it, like, for example, scaling based on popularity or anything like this. So just a simple example.
That's great. Yeah, it looks like a really nice way of navigating and picking out which papers you want, sessions you want to read and papers you want to read. When I was looking at, when you were showing that, it just reminded me of a paper I saw years ago called Document Cards, which was kind of one of the motivations for Scholarcy, where they turn each paper into what they call like a top trumps. So you just get, if you've got a lot of papers to visualize, it turns each paper into a single graphic that's got like the main image from the paper and maybe a couple of quotes from the paper. And it's a way of showing like everything in a paper in a single thumbnail, if you like. And maybe there's a way of doing something like that, so that instead of showing those PDFs in your virtual reality, you're showing maybe like a condensed version of them that maybe has just enough information to decide whether you want to read it or not, perhaps.
That's definitely worth us having a good look at. Just a little bit, Phil, on a sales pitch for the whole VR thing. How long ago has it been since you put on a headset? More than a year. Because Phil, you must have done some VR at some point, right?
No, I've not done any.
Okay.
I might have put on a headset in a museum once or something, but
because the key thing is nothing like Second Life at all. And what Fabienne was showing there is once you're in that space, it becomes really useful and navigable. I sometimes write using my own author in VR for the opposite reason that it's normally good for, because it means I have a limited field of view, I have a nice background, I have a decent sized screen. The visual quality is good enough for writing and it's good enough for reading. You wouldn't want to read forever. Sure, absolutely. But where the whole system is now is that we've done some experiments of a mural, and just having a single mural is absolutely amazing, because it is really hard to describe. When that mural as an image is on a computer screen, you kind of move it about. Yes, of course you can do that. But when you can have it huge and then you do a pinch gesture and it comes towards you and you zoom in different things, it's kind of not explainable why it's so special. And one of the reasons Ismail is here, we're looking at doing some kind of mural and timeline related to Egyptian history. So, you know, it is really, really hard for us. You know, we only started, I mean, Fabienne and Brandel have been going for a long time, but the rest of us, we only started basically in January. So, you know, so I have, you know, my headset here goes on and off depending on what we're doing. But it's really hard to explain the point of it, because sitting down VR is one thing. But what really brought me over the edge was when Brandel said, you know, just moving your head a little bit, as you naturally do, it changes everything. When we have meetings in VR, which we sometimes do, the sense of presence and being with other people, because the audio is spatialized, so if someone's sitting there, the sound comes from there. It's absolutely phenomenal. So I really think that, you know, Obsidian and all of that, it's nice. And even, as you saw in the beginning, Mark has taken not even that many documents, but enough documents that that's all the system can do into this space. It quickly becomes messy. So I think what you contribute is the ability to change the view rapidly and intelligently. There are so many interfaces for VR, and a lot of them is about using your hands and grabbing and moving, and that's all well and fine. But in some of them, you can have, you know, literally buttons to press for certain things to happen. So I could easily imagine a document space. You start with one document, and at least in the beginning, you have a huge set of buttons underneath, very inelegant, obviously. But when you come across a citation, you can do what you already showed. they can start growing the trees. But all these buttons, again, initially, can help you constrain and expand that view. It would be nice to have spoken interface. It would be nice to pull and, that needs to be experimented with. But the reason I was so excited to have you here today, was and is the real interactivity that you give this. You take data that's out there and you make it tangible in a whole new way. So I hope that what we're trying to do some sort of a demo for the next Future of Text. We're looking into building some kind of a workroom, and Brendel has already taken from author, because author documents are they're called .liquid, like, .doc, but .liquid. Inside them, we have JSON. So we have some of those goodies already.
Yeah.
Yes, he's been able to take the map view with the relationships into VR. And of course, it's relatively static, but you can already touch things and see lines appear. To be able to go further and to do with what you have made available would be really quite exciting. I mean, I could very well imagine doing the reading you're talking about. You talked about making it fit an iPad, but what about making it fit a whole room, right?
Yeah.
Or even just fitting one wall to begin with. Where do you actually put the pictures? Where do you put the graphs? So many questions come up. It gets really, really interesting. It's not very obvious at all. But thank you for allowing us to think with available data.
Thanks. Well, it was great to have the opportunity to chat to you all. So thanks for inviting me. Just wanted to touch on one thing that
I'm not saying you should go. It wasn't like a bye-bye summary. So please.
No. I do actually need to go in about 5 minutes, but I just want to say that we spoke on email about this because at the time I had a hard time thinking, what is the VR/AR angle on this? But, you could imagine that if we in an augmented reality setting that you might have a book or a document in front of you, and you've got this augmented view that says, actually, here are the main people citing this paper. This is what they say about it. Here are the main findings of this paper as a separate layer. So you've got the paper there that you can read and navigate in this 3D space. And you've also got this layer that says, hey, here's the really important stuff in this paper that you need to know. And this is what other people are saying about it. And maybe that's one of the use cases for AR in this kind of idea. So, and as you know, Frode, the API is open. So if there's anything that you want to add for your demo, just give me a shout and we can make it available to you. So
over to Brendel, but just really, really briefly, the thing about how things are connected in a VR space is really up for grabs at the moment. It really is the Wild West. So one thing I think we need to do now is just dream crazy dreams. For instance, the Egyptian opportunity, let's say you have the mosque of Tutankhamun sitting literally on your desk because you're working on a project. You should then be able to say, show me how that relates to timeline, when it was found and when it was used. Show me that geographically. All these things should be able to come together. And right now, other than some idiot on Zoom, me, doing it with his hands, it doesn't really connect. And I'm hoping that first of all, your parsing and your genius, but also your willingness to open your APIs to others and to use other APIs can be a really powerful knowledge growing hub. And yeah, Brendel, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely echo everything Frode is saying. If I can characterize what it is that virtual reality, augmented reality, spatial computing writ large does, it's that when you have a display, be it a phone or a screen, even if it's 30 inches or whatever that is, it still very much performs the function of a foveal vision, the central vision of what you're looking at. And there was a lot of really neat sort of exploration of the practical cognitive consequences of that in the 1980s, where they were saying it's like browsing a newspaper through a hole the size of one column wide. And what virtual reality does is take that filter away so that you're able to read those newspapers, but you're also able to see the whole space around it. And to that end, I think we unfortunately, as a result of having 50 odd years of computing being the primary mode of interaction for at least some information knowledge workers, and certainly 30 years of it being the absolute dominant form, is that we have surrendered the space that we would typically do information and knowledge work in to a small computer with a very even smaller sort of visual real estate. So we don't have the ability to think about what the entire space is for, can be encoded for. And to that end, I feel like we have to go back to the metaphors that spring from understanding something like a kitchen or a wood shop, where you have tools, they have places. When you're standing in those places, when you're gripping things in certain ways, that means you're doing certain things, and that you might move a work piece from one place to another in order to be able to undertake some kind of manipulation over it. And so my hope is that when people can kind of return to that within the context of knowledge work, where you can say, I'm looking at this thing right now, but I have this stuff around me. You know, one of the things that I showed Frode and other folks in this group was being able to have writing that you're doing here, and then having the word count over here, so that you don't have to click a button, open a menu in order to see that. That information is available simply from something as simply reflexive as turning your head. Likewise with visual image search happening at the same time. But the other thing that this increased sort of capacity for context does is that it increases by orders of magnitude the way in which scale can be used. And so if you think about a museum in contrast to a book, or in contrast to an academic paper, which is even more compressed and constrained, the way that type scale can be vastly changed in order to tell you things, like the exit signs and the titles over things are not just 2 times larger, but they're maybe 100 times larger. When you have a big piece of writing on a wall talking about how great Van Gogh is, they're 4 different things, but the sort of experiential consequences are absolutely legion, because of the fact that you can devote that space to that and this space to this. And so, yeah, I'm really, really excited about seeing all of the semantic kind of information and insight that you have in Scholarcy, and I'm really excited about thinking about how to encode that into an entire space that people can kind of manipulate and intervene on at that scale.
Yeah, that would be awesome to be able to do that. And I say our API is open, so if people want to try doing that, integrating it into other systems, they can do that. So and also thanks for your suggestions about reifying, if you like, those entities, like, you know, what type of thing are they? Are they a person, are they a place, and so on. And like you said, clicking on those links so you know where it's going to take you in advance without having to wonder. So yeah, some great suggestions there. So thanks very much, Brandel. That's great. I'm afraid I have to go. So it's lovely to meet you all. And yeah, chat to you again soon, hopefully at the next Future of Text meeting.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't see you on Thursday, Phil, but I'm presenting on semantic something that I don't know anything about. So
Okay, no worries.
Presentation, all about visual meta. Anyway, we'll have coffee soon. Thanks for today.
Take care. See you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
I was just going to say, well, he was still here, but I'll just say it to you guys anyway. This obviously gives an opportunity to go from static documents to living dynamic knowledge object kinds of things. Imagine, you know, we have virtual bookshelves behind us, and we're writing a paper. One of our citations is refuted. Wouldn't it be nice to be told that? Maybe that citation in our own document starts pulsing red and we have to pull it off the shelf and see what someone else does. Those are the kinds of opportunities we have. And in terms of the dreaming that we're doing in the group now, I think maybe we should also try to dream about having absolutely all our knowledge in VR, not just one project at a time. Just a little thing, because as Doug said, dreaming is hard work. Fabien, I think you're next.
Thanks. Again, I think I mentioned it once or twice about why I'm doing VR in the first place, but absolutely to have all my knowledge in VR, like 100%. So far, there's been a mix of me not knowing how to do it, the technology not being out there yet, or again, a mix of both, but definitely, and also the bridge between what I don't know and what I already know, so that I could, for example, go from one reference of things I have read to other one, for example, that you suggested. So definitely. What I wanted to show also before your remark was a criticize of what I have shown. For example, I mean, you mentioned what on manipulation aspect, basically. And I think that's the problem when I or others share images of VR or VR content. People think, oh, it's another form of visualization. And it's absolutely not that. Visualization can be part of it, but then as you do the hand waving, that part is really fundamental, and being able to have like fast-paced interaction, tight feedback loop, being able to do it again with a hand relatively naturally. It's not perfect yet, but I think that's the part that's really important. So I think always having like a GIF or a short image to show that we're not just like there in space, or the movement, the head movement also you described, having it in motion as a process. Ideally also, let's say green screen, where we see the actual body of the person with the headset moving and grabbing the actual note. I think all that, especially for people who are not familiar, makes a huge difference. Of course, it's a bit of work, like having a studio set up and ready so that everything is calibrated right for this. But for people who didn't try it yet, they're not the head thinking, oh yeah, I understand. They have no idea. So I think that also helps the project. It's still, of course, not good enough, and as you say, yeah, they need to try it, but I think that's like a little bit further still, so could help.
Yeah, I mean, even if we have a virtual camera in the room that doesn't move, you know, so that the virtual camera records from one perspective, and then you just say, yeah. Mark?
Yeah, because I just actually sort of flowing from that. That's one of the things I found myself, you know, just returning to do some more playing around with stuff in VR, was thinking that I sort of know in principle how I could share that with people, but one of the things I sort of find myself really want to do is, rather than write stuff down, is to essentially, for this state of the art, to be probably streaming my first person perspective of what I'm doing, because I think what's more important is to be able to, because in that context, I'm not trying to convince someone whether they should use VR or not, but what I'd be trying to do is explain to people how some things that are hard that we thought weren't, and you actually sort of need to be seeing it through somebody's eyes to do that. You know, when I can't turn my arm to this angle to do what I thought I could do. And, you know, so as I sometimes found, I mean, an interesting thing I found myself reflecting on, thinking back on my sort of the notes I've been making about the processes, I can do this with my hand. It's 180 degrees rotation is quite natural. But I found in some of the little puzzles and things I've been using and to sort of practice you know, VR work, I was quite surprised that often I find I can only somehow, for some reason, it feels like I can only turn it so far, and I have to let go, get it again and turn it again, which seems counterintuitive. So I haven't bottomed out quite what's happening there, whether it's a cognitive blockage this end, or whether it's something in the way things move. And things like that, I think, are remarkably powerful to be able to sort of show to someone as seen through your eyes, regardless of whether it's in the VR or not, or sorry, regardless of whether they're in the VR or not, simply because otherwise it's really hard to explain. And the thing I stuck my hand up to say, the thing I forgot about when we were talking to Phil earlier is that it strikes me that taking on board in a positive way the limitations of what we can do with you know, some of our structural decomposition of text in terms of natural language processing and things, is that it says to me that one thing we can do, even as we mull over whether we are or aren't going to move away from PDFs, would be to push towards more structured writing. So in a sense, in something like an academic publishing context where there are some rules, I mean, to get published, you have to obey some rules. And I know some areas, I think in health and things, have very much gone towards this, but there's no reason to just not make that more explicit. And it doesn't have to be everything, but even if it was just core things like abstracts and conclusions or end pieces, absolutely had to pass that. You know, in other words, you don't get to go on the ride if you don't do that. It's not impossible to do, and it begs the question: if, for instance, if your conclusion is so vague and woolly that you can't really break it down into something, in fact, maybe you haven't got any conclusions. Which is another, which you know, goes back to the thing. One of the joys of doing documentation is it teaches you how little you understand about the thing you thought you knew.
We are recording. Would you like to pause a little bit, Fabian? And now let's just pretend we're talking and we're going to continue in a second and no pausing is happening at all.
Yeah.
And nothing important happened. Over to you, Fabian.
Yes, I think it's there is a big difference between having meta as a goal, let's say using VR to analyze new ways to work in VR, versus bringing history back in the space we start with, being a room, a mural, or something else. Bob mentioned the idea of when he starts a mural, he has his own murals. He considers them, maybe integrate part of them. And I think that's very valuable. I personally have a wiki. Every page of my wiki has a history, so I can go back at any point in time. And I think I briefly mentioned to Brendel on Twitter today that I have a personal obsession with phylogenies. I think I think the blank page doesn't exist. It's kind of maybe Western conception. But overall, we always have something older that comes from. So I think bringing some history, let's say if we do a VR room, we bring the future of text volumes, or we bring whatever we want, it is not just interesting, but I think has to be done is valuable. Still starting from, let's say, an empty space based on one target, one goal, for example, some points about global warming. But then, yes, bringing that history back in. So.
Sorry, dinner starting. I think we've run over a lot. So yes. So first of all, Jacob is working on export to HTML from author. I don't know exactly what that'll be in terms of what metadata will be how. I also am madly in love with the whole glossary defined terms thing. And I think the reason I'm so in love with it is, you probably, I know half of you will have this book. And you look at so many of the different diagrams, things get messy so quickly. So if you have something you decide yourself is things you really want to have in there, that becomes very useful. And in the future of textbooks, of course, we also have a text timeline, history of text timeline, which we can expand upon and import. So we do have some of that data to tie things in as well. But yeah, okay. So shall we try to dream a little bit for Friday, and then next Friday we dream, and then once we dream about whatever, Egypt or our own record or climate change or whatever it is, then we decide, okay, we settle on a topic, we settle on the beginning of a quote unquote room. Is that kind of where we're at?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me.
Very good. So I wish you luck. I wish me luck. Dreaming is, I'll say it again, it's hard. But because it's different from fantasy, obviously, right? Which is why I hate Harry Potter. Green flash, blue flash. No, purple one is the dangerous. Sorry. Yeah, I gotta go. Okay. Thanks everyone for today. Bye for now. Bye.
Take care.